Hello, everyone. This is Hugh Hendry at Hendry_Hugh on Twitter. Just launched a Substack. You'd think I'd know the name. I imagine it involves my name, but we're not here to discuss my name. We're here to discuss epsilon theory. This is part 2 of Up the River. Are we going to go farther in, deeper and deeper into the jungle, into the madness of Cambodia, or have we gone far enough? Last week was philosophical. This week we're going to kind of examine the whole world of normative value judgments, creeds, beliefs, tribes, and what to do about it. Before I pass over to the wonderfully elastic, mind-expansive personality of Ben Hunt, and by means of introduction for those perhaps joining for the first time, I was a global macro fund manager. I managed an eclectic portfolio. People talk about returns. Yeah, returns are returns. I was different. I didn't correlate to anything. I perhaps when Bitcoin grows up, perhaps it might be a little bit like my hedge fund. Who knows? Enough about me. Ben, please come down from the great clouds of the internet, the great clouds of your intellect, and give us it again, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Hugh. And by the way, it is Hugh Hendry, all one word, .substack.com. Your Substack. So you got to get that out there. We got to get that out there.
From the master. I'm learning from the master. Thank you very much. So how? Yeah, you ready to do this?
I am, Hugh. Always ready to do this. And I'll say if my deets, as the kids would say, it's I'm Epsilon Theory pretty much everywhere, at Epsilon Theory on Twitter and upsonpartners.com on the web.
Wonderful. So last week, like I say, we were philosophical, and this week, I want to get down and dirty. I know you're a man that.
I think philosophy is pretty down and dirty myself, but that's okay. We can.
Yeah. Hey, listen. Like, do not encourage me. Okay. I am under strict instruction to offer the people more. So you're right. More.
Right on.
But us with these curious minds, you and I, that can kind of sometimes enter into a kind of a flow state of thinking. And sometimes when we're really, really lucky, most of the time it's a curse, but sometimes when we're really lucky, we get to see just around the corner of the future. And that's kind of what I'd like to examine today. That in your flow state, what are you summing? What are you summing from the future? What do you have a hint of?
I got to tell you, Hugh, I think about this issue a lot, and the issue I am having, I'd be very curious to know your take on this too, right? The issue I'm having is that I know what I think about where our world is and where it's going. And somehow I'm having a bit of a mental block. I think it's because maybe I'm a little scared. What I mean by that is I'm having a mental block. I'm having it difficult to play this out in my mind to what I think is kind of the very natural conclusion. I mean, and I've never had this problem before, Hugh. I mean, like you, I mean, it's, the fund I ran, I was always able to say, okay, the implications of X, Y, and Z are this. and you may not like what this is. It may be against consensus and all that, all the better. But I'm having a harder time doing that now. And I think it's because I'm a little scared to take things to their conclusion here. What about you? I mean, we can talk about kind of where, the points I can get to, but in general, I'm having a harder time than I have historically had in following through to, yep, this is where we're going.
Well, I mean, Ben, how can I comfort that inner child that's presently in the fetal position? I mean, fear. Tell me more before I can counsel you and before I
So
can.
I'll give you an example. So it was in the fall of 2008. Lehman, the news had gone out, that Lehman just went under that morning. And I'm looking at my portfolio, and my God, I was having a great day, right? I was, the portfolio, we were running not a small amount of money. We were up 5% that day. And so I was thinking, as I'm usually thinking, oh, wow, this is great. Thinking about the portfolio and kind of getting near year end, all that stuff that you usually think about it. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks, Hugh, which was, wait a second. I mean, if the world ends, who's going to pay me? Right? I'm up 5%. What does that mean? I mean, they're just, ledgers on this electronic, database. Who's going to pay me? And I'm kind of having that same sort of feeling, Hugh. I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is going to happen, and I've been thinking about this, and I've been writing about this stuff. Well, if things go where it feels like they're going to me, I mean, that's such a fundamental change in our nice little world that the game we're playing doesn't matter so much. That's the feeling I'm having these days, Hugh.
But it's as though, so that fateful Monday morning,
yeah,
I woke up out of the longest nightmare of my life that had begun around about the end of March 2007. The Big Short. I mean, I met Greg, the Deutsche Bank. So we were the dog and kennel club of London. We harbored misfits, and he stayed literally. He used our office, not Deutsche's office. He wasn't welcome there.
Right.
And my former investment partner was saying, you got to listen to this guy. And I met him the first time, and like the caricature in the movie, I was like counting my fingers after I shook his hand. You forgive me, Greg, but you just seemed like such a sleazeball. I was like, yeah, and then again and again, and you're like, oh my God. And then we went to put the trade on, and the European system was back then more, if you will, regulated is not the word, but checks and balances with transparency. You had a custodian bank, and each day they would calculate your NAV, and we would do it, but the custodian bank was the one that we would basically settle, and they made the market weekly at that time in my fund, and then so we introduced the great trade, and they said no. We're like, what do you mean no?
What do you mean no? Yeah.
And they said, this is such a complex and essentially a new product that with our fiduciary duty to make a market in your fund as regular as you insist, because my point was, I believe in sharp pencils. I met a wonderful underwriter from Lloyd's of London when they began to open up to external equity capital. And he said, hey, look around this room. These are all my underwriters. They have my personal underwriting pen, but I have a dagger placed right on their spine. And if they so much as take their eye off, then it's that sort of thing. And so with us, they just said we can't make the market. And I was crestfallen. It was like I found the golden ticket in the chocolate bar, and I was going to visit Charlie Wonka. And so I then went into a frenetic shaman-like thing of what to do, and we finally worked out an overly complex. We did the 210 steepener. We had $1 million per basis point change, so we had funky leverage. We had it in an absolute. There was an absolute loss because it was on via derivatives. But you know what I really messed up with, Ben? Because you couldn't determine the day, the week, the month. Um, we we did that spread not as of today, but 2 years forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's when I entered into the chamber of hell.
Yep.
Because
no doubt.
everything that I prophesized would happen, the cash spread went, the Fed went to zero, and we all know the story. But the 2 year, it was like a waterbed. As much as the Fed, if you will, pressed on one side of the bed, it pushed the oil price to $150. Do you know what the French for a bat is? The French for a bat is a chauve-souris. That is a blind mouse, and I think it's a very apt title for the Fed and indeed the markets of that, especially the ECB. Forgive me, ECB raised interest rates in the summer.
I remember well.
We have to just keep saying that.
Yeah.
Life is absurd. A good old Albert Camus. And so the 2 year spread said, hey, this is an aberration, and there's inflation, which I think we're going to discuss, and you got the wrong trade. So when you made 5%, this is not a kind of pissing competition. Like I say, I went to hell, and on that morning I made 50%. 50%.
Yeah.
And then, kind of life has a way of intruding. I took my young daughters to the school, which was walking distance. And of course, it's a very, very expensive school. And a large contingent of Lehman Brother type families. Mm-hmm. And again, they were chauve-souris. They had belief, and again, belief systems is something I want to explore with you. I want to say, to a man and a lady, they didn't cash out. They believed they would get through it.
No, wrote it all the way down.
They were wiped out. So then I am skipping, doing headstands to this skill, and then I hit this profound wall of sorrow. I mean, I'll start crying as my ego melts. But to see the fear and women discussing the notion that they might actually have to take their precious cargo and remove it from the school, mind-blowing. So we've shared that journey. I'm guessing you, like me, I'm feeling where we're going into could be as bad, if not worse. Is that what you're sensing?
It is, but I'm thinking about it on a slightly different dimension than a market dimension. But it's a similarly systemic unraveling of a way that I really haven't been able to contemplate before. And it's really a political unraveling that is where I see the clear implications of X, Y, and Z, what's happening today. I see it in a complete political unraveling. Yes, in Europe, but they always seem to find some way to kind of muddle through and kind of pretend and extend. But particularly in the United States, I think there's a profound rot in our economy, the real economy. I think that the politics of today are impossible for the Fed or for anyone, citizens alike. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but it'd be incomprehensible that I would have said this at any time in my adult life. I can see a non-trivial chance of actual organized political violence and secessionary movements in the United States over the next 2 or 3 years. I can't believe I'm saying that. I can't believe I'm saying that. And yet I am. I really feel that. The disjunctures in our society have become so untenable. And inflation is the piper, right? Inflation is the piper who comes and starts playing the tune, and he's got to be paid. And that's where I'm really having a hard time wrestling with the consequence. I tell you, the only other time I've experienced this, Hugh, it was actually in 2009, after the the crash, right? So this was in May of '09. So just to kind of recap for your audience, the S&P bottomed in March of '09. S&P bottomed right at 666, which is always kind of a fun kind of numerological Kabbalah, exercise there. And so we had a nice rally as the Fed expanded QE and did what they did, which I think saved the world. Had a nice rally in March. Went kind of flat, down a little bit in April. And then in May, and then also in June, we had what I would call as crap rallies, where all the bad stuff, all the worst stocks did the best. Right? It was a classic crap rally. And I remember thinking at that time, oh my God, the Fed's not going to stop what they're doing. They're doing what they're doing. They're going to keep doing this forever. They're going to blow a bubble. It's not going to be a housing bubble. They're going to blow a bubble of everything. I remember thinking that. I remember where I was. I was sitting at my desk. I was saying, oh my God, this is going to be the bubble of everything. And I found it impossible to follow through in my mind with what the consequences of that, which were, it's time to lever long, and especially with the crap. And instead, I did, I've got my process and I got longs and shorts, and here's the catalyst, blah, blah, blah. And we'd had a career year in '08. It's all good. But I remember thinking that, oh my God, they're not going to stop. It's going to be the bubble of everything. And I couldn't see my way forward to, okay, play that out in your business world, in your business life, in your personal life, play that out. And I'm having a similar issue today. I see what I see. I'm having trouble saying, okay, play that out. That's what I'm having trouble with, Hugh.
So the contentious thing that I'm aiming at is absolution for the Fed. I don't wish to forgive the Fed, because we talked about this the last time. They played a very dangerous game. They played a game of they didn't play a monetary game. They played a psychological game, a game of psychological warfare. They pretended to be omnipotent. They pretend. They actually had profound conceit, because
absolutely.
Possibly you could give Greenspan and his preemptive rate hike of 1994, which took down Orange County, and I think there was another celebrated victim at the time. Maybe I'll give him that. And I don't mean to personalize with Greenspan, the whole group.
Yeah.
I can't think of when they really got anything right. And that can take you back to 1929. The history of the institution is flawed. However, they're the Wizard of the Wizard of Oz, which is now obviously gaining in enormous circulation as more and more people understand that political allegory. They're powerless. The monetary system evolved away from them, but it's a battle of wills, it's a battle of minds, and so they pretend. And their pretense worked, as you say, in March 2009. Citigroup was trading at $9. It was trading at the same price as had prevailed in 1977. Why did we mention Citigroup? Because probably it was the biggest bank in the world at that time, being supplanted, of course, today by Jamie and his JP Morgan. And 9 was an overstatement, because it was worth zero. It was bust. And so assets were kind of Bobby Digital. They were set to reset to zero. And so the Fed grabbed the microphone. They have a better microphone than me. I have an imaginary microphone. And they talked about supporting stocks. And the hideous thing, and where the rot set in, and where if we were to shoot back to the future, and what you were saying about, you fear the dawn of chaos, you fear this polarization of American society, not just being polarized, but beginning actually
violent
to attack. Yeah, and the reason, the root of that lies at the decision for all citizens in America to underwrite asset prices to prevent the reset to zero. And I can be convinced that had to be done, but it required an urgent modification or alternative once we had stabilized the patient, because the hideous nature of that is that the disenfranchised, and what I mean by that is those who don't own assets.
Hugh, I'm going to interrupt you because we're in violent agreement on this, right? Because my strong view is that Obama was frankly the most profoundly conservative president of the past 100 years, conservative with a small c, because there was an opportunity, to your point, once this patient is stabilized, to take a freaking blowtorch to Wall Street and the entire system. Take a blowtorch. And that's what he was elected to do. Change, It was a once in a century opportunity to remake this entire inequitable system. Like I say, just take a blowtorch to it. And he frankly chickened out, right? Instead, the big move was, we're going to bend the curve on healthcare costs. And it's going to be Geithner and Paulson and all the crew are just going to not take a blowtorch to Wall Street, but make Wall Street stronger than ever. Make those banks stronger than ever. And it's just the most squandering of an opportunity that I know of, that I can say. And now when you sow the wind and you reap the whirlwind, I mean, that's what we're reaping now. And we're reaping it in the form of insane people like a Donald Trump, right? With just profoundly incompetent people like a Joe Biden. And it's just like, I see where this is going in the same way that I saw where it was going in 2009. And I'm having a hard time pushing myself to say, okay, that's where you see it's going. So what are you going to do about it?
Because I kind of re-emerged from my my man cave, closing it. I didn't elect to close. I'm very transparent. Someone close to me once said I should really consider taking a secret, a hostage. I let them all run free. I lost the large remaining client that kind of bankrolled the business. And that was the end after precisely 15 years. And, you have to kind of regroup. And I'd succeeded, and I'd found a voice in around about March 2020, which obviously coincides with COVID. And in that summer, I put out a paper, The Dawn of Chaos. And I was arguing that, for sure, with Milton Friedman, inflation is a monetary phenomenon. But I thought it required an adjunct, something that was missing in the observations, and that was that it was also a psychological phenomenon.
Absolutely, amen, brother, amen. I guess I'm frustrated with the kind of to say that inflation is always monetary phenomenon. That it's a it's a tautology, right? It's a tautology. You can't disprove. I mean, it's all, of course that's true, but there's absolutely, whether you want to call it a behavioral, psychological, a narrative element, you've got to have the expectations. Yeah, you call it expectation, but that is absolutely the sufficient condition, right? There's the necessary condition of being a monetary phenomenon, but the sufficient condition is exactly what you're saying.
So, because if it's left exclusively as a monetary phenomenon, then I still think the system is insulated. What we're seeing in higher relative prices, I don't think presently is sustainable without a psychological intervention. I would still draw the comparison with the end of the Second World War. the return of the return of domestic demand, and prices had to be bid up to bring on a supply response. And for 2 years in America, prices flared by almost 20% year over year before abating. COVID was a war. It was a global war. We lost a lot of productive capacity, and we lost hearts and minds. It feels like Atlas Shrugged, and people keep disappearing. They're not turning up. Not just the leaders are all there. I mean, the leaders are at the, like the pig in the snout. And and if I was to justify my return and why I'm trying to make a splash with my silly hats and stuff, back in that 2000, the tumult of 2008, 9, 10, I was on public broadcast television in the United Kingdom trying to explain, because the issues back then, and they've only continued to escalate, were almost greater than the ability of the politicians and their skill level to comprehend or to do anything about. And so they were lashing out, and they needed villains. And like we're in a rich minority that kind of got things right. Boom, we're the villains. Yep. But I had to retire from that because my principal day job was I was a hedge fund manager. And it kind of took me 18 months to reconcile that. Today, I'm not a hedge fund manager, and I'm free to discuss these things. So anyway, I don't think that tail wagging the dog, the scale of the public debt markets are so magnificently large vis-a-vis GDP that the historical comparisons with, let's say, Germany after the First World War, or indeed any of those European or Japan and China, etc., in that kind of 1930s period, they really they don't apply because there's a fire break. I don't know if you agree with that.
Honestly, Hugh, and I'm curious to see what you think about it. I mean, when I look at the question of debt and its relationship to the real economy, and particularly when you look at the last 10 years in terms of productivity in the United States, it's been the worst decade for productivity in the history of the United States. This is what I mean by rot, right? The rot that's occurred in our economy, a rot that I don't know how you get out, how you get unrotten while you have such an overwhelming amount of debt. And so again, this is one of those where I kind of play it out. What's the complete? All I can come up with, and I'm really curious to take on this, is I think at some point after some enormous crisis, like a world war, like a civil war, you have a jubilee. That's the outcome of this. It's just jubilee. And I don't know how to process that thought, but that's the kind of where I keep ending up. I don't know what you think of that, but that's where I keep ending up.
Well, the Jubilee is redistribution. The first thing, I'm not an advocate of the productivity story. I think it's absolute bunkum. I think it's an argument from academic economics departments. I don't think we've ever been more productive. I mean,
oh, come on, Hugh.
I honestly,
you think you're more productive with this thing?
I'm certain that I am. And with all of the advances technologically, I just don't think it's measured. I think it's impossible. The fact that we can communicate by WhatsApp, by email, by whatever, rather than having to send a physical letter, is that captured in the statistics? I don't think it is. The fact that we can have this conversation and what that extends itself to the pool of knowledge.
I mean, how is? I mean, and I'd kind of. Unfortunately, I kind of argue about our conversation too. I mean, this doesn't get reflected in the real, right? And it also doesn't get reflected in us being happier or better off, right? When I think of the hour that my addiction to Twitter, for example, when I think that this machine is the last thing I look at when I go to sleep, and it's the first thing I look at when I wake up in the morning, I ain't being more productive because of it. I mean, this is what I say. Oh, I've got to for my business, and I've invested a lot in Twitter. Twitter is important for our distribution like that. It's bullshit. You know, it's a dopamine machine, and I'm an addict. And I am not personally more productive before of it because I don't think, I react, I communicate more, but it's communication without something, right? Without a spark. It's the short attention span theater applied to everything in my life.
Wow.
And I am less productive because of it. And I think our world is less productive for it. There you go.
I mean, I would not dare say that you are confusing happiness with productivity or productivity with soulfulness. Your complaints make me think of when we were back in the 17th century or so, when we were trying to destroy the printing press. It makes me think of the enormous productivity leap with the Industrial Revolution. But by being the manual labor person, it didn't feel fun being in that grotesque factory, being in those awful conditions. But productivity was certainly enhanced. And for your business, for you started this new venture 8 years ago. This technology offers you the ability to. There are 8 billion people on the planet. There are 4 billion with smartphones, and you can reach them. I mean, that is enormous, and I just don't think it's measured. But
it's true. It's enormous. I think it's a good thing, right? And at what cost? I just think of the whole, gladiator meme. Are you not entertained? Right? Because that's what I find that a lot of our businesses becomes. Are you not entertained? And I'm hard pressed to think of the productivity, or any metric on which that's a good thing, except the level of dopamine. Yeah. We are a dopamine-rich society. I will give you that.
For sure. My guiding principle is that there's an old refrain: wherever people tell you what I am, that's not what I am, so to speak. And so when everyone's convinced on that productivity thing, now I'm like, yeah, I'm not so sure. But that's not it's not quite the thrust. Maybe there is an element of that because, like you say, it's a dopamine machine, and it's creating binary tribal factions, and we're like inflating and accentuating the investiture of the two tribes.
So I've become like in Dune. I've become thinking about a Butlerian jihad. I mean, I don't know how the human animal. We're not evolved to handle this thing. We're not. We're not evolved to handle it politically, socially, any other way. We're
evolved to be exploited by it. Simple as that.
Yes.
It's a system where like one person, winner takes all. Like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, et al. But there's 10 people, maybe 20 people in a world of 8 billion, and they get it all. But it will play into, is inflation monetary? Yes. But to unleash it in our modern world with the scale of fire breaks, I think we're going to get a severe recession. That's a function of messing around, I would say, blindly with the natural rate of interest. And I think that will circumvent and will be a circuit breaker for the inflation. I don't think we'll be talking about the next decade as being inflationary on its own without a psychological intervention. But
Hugh, I want to press you on that. So I agree with you on that recession aspect of big, nasty recession in the real economy. Now, what's the reaction to that? If not more debt, right? Isn't that going to be the reaction? Isn't that going to be the reaction function? More debt?
No, heaven knows, the initial reaction will be a form of jubilee, which is the orthodoxy, which is the forgiveness of debt. Here are the keys. I'm sorry, your debt's just been reset to cents on the dollar, right? So that form of jubilee comes to pass in these severe recessions. It's a redistribution of income from creditors to debtors. That's all kind of good. But when I kind of lost my thrust, and we don't have much time with you. I say to you that these asset prices and this rupture in our society is actually a function of the economic model being pursued by, heavens, half of the world's, not by half, by the unelected leaders of, 50, 60% of the world's population, which predominantly takes us into China, into Singapore, into Japan, into South Korea, but of course, equally into Germany. And they're, mercantilists are statist. They do not, their principal ambition is to perpetuate their own. They're a selfish gene that wants to go on forever.
Amen.
And they're very fearful of us. They're very fearful of us working ants. Like China looks at 2008. And more pertinently, it looks at Thailand in 1996, 1997, et al. And it says, if we were, look, that's what happens. If we give the worker ants the discretion to spend money, to create what we would say in economics, endogenous growth created within the border of the nation, we can't trust them. They're bonkers. They confuse, I think, individually. Well, no, they don't. They say individually they're really smart. But when you put all of those worker ants together, they're blinking crazy. And we will have a 2008 profound economic recession. And with those economic disasters, people demand political change, which is not permitted in those fascist-like regimes. So they have a model where they've essentially part's not really there. They've done vendor financing. They've pushed effectively $7 trillion. I think $7 trillion would be about three United Kingdoms in terms of annual output. Some kind of big deal, yeah. And they've said, you don't even have, what is that crazy technology thing for credit in the last year? Buy now, effectively, they say pay later.
Yeah.
Pay never,
Pay never, yeah.
And that's their model. Now, that's what Bernanke was talking about when he did his scholarly thesis about the glut of savings. It is an unwillingness to pursue endogenous growth in those nations and to siphon or to allocate it, but they're allocating it to mature liberal democracies with investiture of contract law. We can criticize it, but our societies we should all be envious of our society. By and large, works. Good contract.
Hugh, you're making my productivity argument for you. Yes, there's a glut of savings, and it's not going for productive, growing things. It's not going to build a new anything. It's not going to hire new people for anything. It's going for, are you not entertained? And it's going for control. And this is the financialization of our economy. This is the argument I'm making, Hugh. And this is why I don't see an out here.
I do.
Okay, let's hear the out.
So to stop the rot. So the United States is not in the 19th century. It is not building canals and dams and from 19th and into the early 20th century. Not building trains, train lines. It's not building. The chemical plants haven't just been invented. The telephone hasn't just been invented. It has no need for external financing, but it's been deluged by external financing. And all the productive investments within the United States are well bid by domestic sources. Right? Okay. And so the unwillingness to pursue growth in mercantilist nations has effectively supplies too much capital to the world, and it takes the cost of money to absurdly low levels, which have an influence on asset prices. It takes asset prices certainly of safe, secure assets, logically to infinity. That's where we've been with Apple at $3 trillion. Okay, and it turns our liberal, functioning, democratic societies from productive, to your point, to speculative. economies. And that's where the rot and the vulnerabilities lie. So the Fed is an irrelevance. We have to stop.
Agreed.
The accumulation of sovereign nations pursuing a strategy which is against our best wishes. And so you do that very simply. You say, we believe in trade. Trade is a wonderful thing. But this flow thing, we disagree with. So we're going to impose a withholding tax. Now, that won't stop them because they're not safe. The Chinese organization responsible for the investment of those treasuries et al. They're not a hedge fund, right? Their return policy is the preservation of the CCP. So if you turn around and you say, you know what, guys, it's 3%. Okay. Now think of, and it's every year. And 3% on $7 trillion is a big number. Okay. Now, what do we do with that $7 trillion? We're in a funk because asset values owing to this predatory financing behavior are profoundly overstated versus the function of GDP, of prosperity, the march of prosperity over time. They're profoundly overstated. And we kind of really have to keep them overstated and hope that GDP can then meet it, which is to say, in the deep recession that both you and I agree is coming, at some point the Fed will step in with their rhetoric and they will claim to be buying or supporting asset prices to prevent them going to zero. Okay. At that point, with the funds from the withholding tax, they should be using that to fund a sovereign wealth tax for the disenfranchised citizens of America who do not have assets. So when you come in and you support asset prices, you're making there's an expense, you create an asset, and the asset completes the circle, and then we're all enfranchised, and we take down the level of bitterness which is tearing us apart. That's where I am.
I see it, right? I mean, it's you're basically, like say, imposing a tax, an actual tax, right? On, in this case, China, right? To pay for a redistribution here in the U.S. Don't you think, though, that we're going to, before the day that happens, right? We go from a trade war to a financial war. Don't you think we have a real ass war in the South Pacific when that happens? I mean, how does that not happen?
Well, I think we're terrifyingly close to that happening, regardless. Okay. But
see, that's where I'm going, Hugh. I go down these paths, and I hadn't heard that the withholding tax. I mean, I get it, right? I really do. But at every point along the way of the getting from here to there, I see a dominant strategy by the other players to say, screw this, that's untenable, and so we're going to. It ends up being Weimar or war, and unfortunately, I think it probably ends up being Weimar and war. Right? And in that environment, it's like Doctor Strange. You go into the future and Infinity Wars. I go through 14 million permutations, and there's one way out of this. I don't even see the one. And so what I'm left with is, right, so what do I do? How do I live? Right? And what my answer to this is, there is no answer on the Weimar and or war, right? That you've got to be like, Augustine. You see the decline of the Roman Empire, and you, not physically in my case, but I'll say epistemically, you move to South Africa and you watch it from afar and you build an ark. Again, not a real physical ark, but a way of preserving small L liberal and small C conservative ideas and beliefs and getting them over to the other side. And that's what I come up with as far as giving some positive energy to my life is in, building an ark.
Yeah.
I know we're getting way afield here, but I really, when I go through these scenarios, I say it's Weimar or war, which ends up being Weimar and war. I don't see where the future diverges from that.
I'm not sure I would choose South Africa for my arc, but you're spot on. I mean, my personal, I built my arc. I mean, I'm in a tiny rock in a sea of merd, hot merd in the Caribbean, but like far removed from,
Yeah.
I withdrew because, so one of the issues, Ben, is, again, I keep saying this word investiture, experts. And your paper, was it, what was the distinction you were making? Was it confetti news? Was that
fiat news? Fiat news. It's not fake news. It's not counterfeit news. It's news by assertion. It's opinion presented as fact.
Yeah, by experts. And my career, I was the architect of all of my failures and all of my successes. I had disdain. Disdain is a strong word, but I was disinterested in experts. And experts have no solution today. And so the politicians are politicians, right? They go funneling expert opinion. And I am just appalled two things, that there's just no depth in expert opinion. Like the centrist ground is full of repeating the same failed strategy over and over again. We can all recall the Einstein quote. And secondly, the experts are invested, right? Like when that glut of money comes and it takes Apple to $3 trillion and treasuries to 46 basis points, who makes money? Like that's where you get this profound, it's now the 1% of the 1%, So why would they wish to rock the boat? And they'll soothsay, I should have my other hat on. Because the one thing they don't want you to say in the media, I gave an interview with the London Times this week. And they said, what should ordinary folk do about this? It looks really bad. What should ordinary folk do about this? And initially, I was like, am I going to tell them, turn down the temperature, drive less, like eat better? And what I should have said is, again, what I always say, I recommend you panic. That's how you change the system, by getting everyone to panic and say, no, we hate you guys. You guys are idiots. You're robbing us. I panic is my motto.
I hear you, and I'm trying to go beyond panic, right? Because now, I'm seeing with what's possible when the panic becomes organized by political entrepreneurs into political violence. That's when I feel like we're living through. It's you end up living through the period of Leviathan, right? Where in a Hobbesian world where life becomes nasty, brutish, and short, and that ain't the way to go either. Well, I think that's where we end up, though. I think that's where we end up. Whether you panic or you don't panic, I think there's enough political entrepreneurs who see this as an avenue towards their own personal aggrandizement. You've got enough of the 1% of 1%, as you're saying, who are committed to the end to preserve what is theirs. And I think you end up with the same sort of, War of the Roses and the like with that, that Hobbes was writing about. And so for me personally, it's finding meaning, a positive energy out of that, as opposed to living out the script of something that I think ends really poorly. And the positive energy I find is to try to, what is the way of preserving what is great about this world and getting that over to the other side.
Yeah. So you've got to go, but with this kind of desperately dark future that we're seeing. So, I got asked what should ordinary people do? what are the, so I'm not telling them how to get out of bed and to brush their teeth, but in the
Right.
world of trying to protect their financial wealth, before you go, is there anything you can kind of, what do you
Absolutely. Absolutely. Two things. One is find your pack. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your friends. I don't know who it is, right? But it's people who treat you as an autonomous human being, not as a means to an end. And it sure as hell ain't your political party, and it sure as hell ain't your corporation, right? So find your pack, because that's how you'll get through this. And the second thing is, wherever possible, to reconnect with what's real, which ain't this. So, yeah, that's my concrete advice. And to find positive energy and thinking about what you can do locally, not to change the world,
Yeah.
but to write a new story for yourself to get to another side.
But do you think if nothing's changed, then there will be a reversion again back to the high point, the all-time highs of asset prices? Yes or no? Or you think the inflation thing prevents that? That's the circuit breaker.
I think the inflation thing prevents that. I think it prevents monetary policy from being used to preferentially impact housing prices and financial asset prices. Without having that, impact the real economy. And I think that the whole Greenspan model, right, of trying to make us richer than our economy grows, I think that whole playbook of the last 25 years, you can't do it if you're serious about dealing with inflation. Maybe you're not serious, right? I can see that happening. In which case, yeah, asset prices go to new highs. Absolutely, they do. And inflation is entrenched at 11%.
In the absence of a warfare in the South Pacific, the Chinese will continue to depending on how severe the recession is. But if they muddle through and they're back growing at the artifice of 5, which is probably more like 2 in terms of productive investment, they will continue to create this tsunami wave of surplus savings, which will take rates down again. No.
No, unless you have what you've seen with Russia, right, where you have embargo and hot war and disinvestment in China. I do think, and I don't mean this, I think politics always trumps economics, and I no pun intended, although puns can happen too. Yeah.
No, in the United Kingdom, we study politics, philosophy, and economics.
Yep.
And it's for
PPE.
For others to decide the hierarchy and how we call it PPE just because that's kind of cute. But Ben, thank you. Sorry for the technical. There's always a technical issue.
All good, Hugh. All good. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. So I'm going to go over to Substack and look you up at hughhendry.substack.com.
Listen, I'm going to send you. I recommend you panic hat.
I'll wear it. Send me that hat, and I'll wear it.
I will. Listen, thank you very much, my friend. Partner in crime, Mr. Chaos, Mr. Show Business, Chris Sweeney, at Sweeney Writes on Twitter, will be back next week. We're going to go tangentially again. But come over, look at the Substack. I've been teasing you with these hats. This is the time we're going to launch the hats. You will find linkages in the Substack. So if we're to avert some of this rather gloomy, this catastrophic sort of war, famine, pestilence, assassinations, our national tribes attacking each other, we're going to have to take down expert opinion, and we're going to have to replace it with something else. And I'm fed up with rigid thinking. I do flow, and it's my promise to you that I'm stepping my game up, and I'm going to try and be everywhere to try and challenge and to try and create a different way and a more positive way of dealing with the future. with solutions which we have not attempted as a society before. To reiterate my point, I think the Fed's an irrelevance, and I think it's this different economic model being pursued by unelected and undemocratic economies, which is to blame. So, Substack, we got the YouTube Hugh Hendry official. I'm sure my HughHendry.com is still there. We've got Twitter, Hendry_Hugh. Get your hat. Be part of the tribe. Spread the creed. And let's see if we can make a better world, as preposterous as that sounds. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us again.